Well, the moral of that tale is that sometimes you have to look outside of your industry for inspiration. But how do you know where to look? Well, let's ask this week's board of directors. Steve Strauss joins us again. He's the author of the bestseller Small Business Bible. He's a columnist for usatoday.com and a frequent speaker for business organizations around the world. And Ryan Blair joins us for the first time. He's the CEO of PathConnect.com. That's a company which connects small business owners with mentors, and he is also an investor and has started quite a few businesses. Thanks both of you for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. All right. It was so interesting to go down there to the pet barn and see how he changed his thinking from being part of the pet industry to the travel industry. Right. Is that applicable for other people and other organizations?
Yeah, I think there's good news and bad news when you do something like that. I mean, it's a very clever idea that he had. And, the bad news is there's going to be a learning curve for the employee, bringing in an employee from a different industry. But the good news is that there's going to be a learning curve for you. Mm-hmm. You're going to get some information and perspective and ideas that you've never gotten before. So I think that's really valuable.
Well, I'd say that he is truly the expert inside that company. So he knows everything about pets. He knows everything about kennels and the industry. So he can bring in outside perspectives and then mesh the culture and the shared experience and knowledge together. So if he was not necessarily an expert in his industry, I'd say it's bad news. But since he is, he can educate and train people on the specifics to that industry.
So where do you know where to look? Where do you turn?
Well, I think you have to look at, what industries are analogous to what you do, so that the skills that you're going to get are at least transferable skills. You can't get somebody who's altogether different and new and knows nothing and it doesn't have transferable skills. But if you find an industry that's similar to yours and you can bring people over, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I call it the same as principle. So what is the same as this business? If I'm looking at any business model, I want to look at other models out there that are the same as, whether it be economics, financial, or consumer-driven companies, brand companies. It just depends on what is the same as in the industry. So you have to search. Sometimes it's the store shelves you're looking at. Sometimes it's online websites. And
you have a company where people are constantly talking to each other. Maybe that's the kind of place you could go to.
Oh yeah,
to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you want to have a lot of, as an entrepreneur, you want to have a lot of friends that are also entrepreneurs. So when you throw out an idea or you're talking about a business challenge, you can learn from that collective experience pool. It's kind of a mastermind, and that's what we put together with our company, and that's one of the things that served me in building all of my companies.
So basically, don't turn away other people if they come from something that's completely different than yours.
No.
Now, one interesting thing that he did, it wasn't in the piece that we just showed, but he hired a lot of high school students because he needed so much manpower to do stuff like play with the dogs, wash the dogs. It seemed like a great idea for getting manpower, but you're constantly then having to train these people because there's so much turnover. Is that a good idea? How do you weigh?
I've worked with high school students as interns, and I've had high school students as part of my organizations, but there is a very expensive management and training burden associated with that, and it just has to be understood deeply in the organization. Well,
I think that's true, but hiring high school students worked for a guy named Ray Kroc, right, who invented McDonald's. And he created, in fact, one of the greatest brands ever, a multi-billion-dollar business, by hiring high school kids to run these businesses. I mean, it's, if you can do it, the costs or savings are fantastic, but you have to have standards and checklists and great supervision and, of course, a lot of training. But it can work and it can save you a lot of money.
Time to get our board of directors to now answer all of your small business questions. First up is a question about how to pay your expenses.
Although I have steady jobs coming in, I find that month to month it's starting to get hard to pay off my expenses. So how do I go about getting a small business loan, and what do banks look for?
Steve?
Well, the most important thing you can do is look for a loan that's guaranteed by the SBA, by the Small Business Administration. The SBA does some great guaranteed loans, the 7A loan program. Others like that, you're going to get really favorable rates, and of course they're going to look at your credit, your collateral, your capacity to repay it, the 4 C's of credit.
My past experiences working with friends and family, or seeking investments from non-banks, so non-financial institutions, and there's ways to actually do that. There's a lot of people that have extra capital and they'd be willing to put it into a business, and certainly it pays more than the average interest rates do. So I would focus on friends and family as my first resource.
How far would you look out, too? If she just needs money to pay her expenses sort of month to month, and then money, it sounds like, is just coming in a little later?
Well, I'd say you'd always like to have 6 months worth of cash in the bank minimum to cover expenses, so that way you're not making short-term decisions when you should be thinking long-term in any business. At least 6 months minimum cushion.
Sure, and also you want to let the numbers do the talking. And entrepreneurs tend to be really excited and full of ideas and enthusiasm, and sometimes short on the number stuff. And if you're going to get a loan, man, make sure you know the numbers and you know how you're going to pay it back, and you can show that to your lender, then your chances are much higher.
Be very conservative, that's for sure. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next one. This is a question about adding a socially responsible component to your company.
We are a for-profit Delaware incorporated company, and I'm interested in starting a non-profit foundation as part of the company. What is the right way to do a 501, I think it's 501c3?
It is a 501c3. Any ideas?
Well, I've only used those 501c3s as a way to donate some of the proceeds from our companies, and generally for tax purposes. So if you're looking to be a contributor, what I would do is partner with a charity that already has their 501c3 set up. You still get to write it off, and you still can participate in the cause that you're wanting to participate in.
So in essence, you find somebody who's a fiscal sponsor, they take a percentage, and then you don't have to go through the whole process.
And then nowadays, in donating money, you can actually dictate exactly how that money is spent, just as you would if you ran your own foundation and had your own charity. So when I give a donation, I don't allow it to go 90% to overhead. I want it to go 99%.
That is you as a donor, though, versus this woman who's trying to set up someplace where people can donate.
Well, as you know, I'm a recovering attorney. I don't have to do that anymore, fortunately. But what I do know is setting up a 501c3 is like setting up any other corporation. You need articles of incorporation, you need a board of directors, that kind of stuff. So, and you're going to need a lawyer.
Okay, moving on to our emails. This first one keeps up with our pet motif that we have today. It comes from Sam Bodie, and he writes, I truly think I have the best cat toy in the world. I have a website, but I don't think anyone can find it. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, look, search engine optimization, SEO, is very complicated. We don't want to get into it here, but the key is to think about the keywords that people are going to type in to their search engine to find your website. My brother recently wanted to find some great earplugs. He was traveling on a plane, so he typed in the best earplugs in the world. And you know what? Up came the best earplugs in the world. So somebody had done some great research on keywords, and I think that's what you have to do.
I mean, there's two things. One is the amount of exposure, but then two is the amount of conversion. Some people are looking for millions of web traffic per month, but the truth is if you just converted 100 people per month into your product or service, you'd probably be very happy. So I'd focus more on the conversion side of it than the exposure generally. All
right, I'm going to do him a little favor and tell everyone out there that it is www.polecatpoll.com.
You are so nice.
We'll do a little help for him. Okay, this next email comes from Greg Kane. He has some contracts already in place for his startup, but suddenly has some money issues. He writes, my main financial backer has backed out. I need $7,000 to $10,000 ASAP, but I have bad credit. I'll make a minimum of $20,000 profit the first year, and I'm willing to give up 20% of my company. So where does he go? I mean, right away he needs some money.
20% for $7,000. Yeah. It's not a very good deal.
Maybe he needs to go to you.
The dreaded cash credits. People face it all the time. But if he has a contract in place, that's valuable. He can get a loan against the contract. The contract would be collateral, I would think.
Well, when you need money, it's hardest to find, and that's the unfortunate side of it. So, once again, look internal, friends, family, associates, maybe even employees to pool their funds together. 20% for 10 grand that's a steal if it's a good business.
That's right. So is he being too generous then, probably?
Far too generous, and he might even want to just get a loan. Not an equity loan, but a debit loan.
Okay.
Far too generous.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go into our fishbowl here. Dipping in, and the question is, how do I pick a name for my business? I'm going to start with you because you've named quite a few businesses.
Well, I got two answers to that question. One is I always like to find one that I have the .com available on it, so that way for marketing purposes. But then two, you want something that that actually is fun, that's 2 syllables or less if you can help it, something that people can pronounce. So it's very difficult to name and spell, and and phonetically it sounds like it is. And then the second answer to the question is use your mother's maiden name and the street you grew up on.
Isn't that your porn name or something like that?
Can I just add one more thing to that? And that is, for the small business, you want to create a strong brand. And the best way to create a brand for a small business is how you name the business, what you name the business. So if you can think about what your brand is and the benefits you're going to offer, and you put those together in a brand, in a name, for example, Jiffy Lube, or Quickie Mart, or something like that. So you tell the benefit, you tell your brand, that's how people are going to find out who you are and what you're all about.
Would you suggest hiring one of those naming companies?
Unless only if you're bad with words.
Okay. Yeah. And if you have a lot of extra cash.
Yeah.
They're expensive, right? Okay, quickly, we're going to go to the next one. And the question is, how do you manage a sales force?
Well, Salesforce is kind of like herding cats. It's almost impossible to effectively manage them all the time. But the way you do that is obviously through constant training, constant motivation, and constant tools and new systems for conversion and new systems for marketing and so forth. So, ultimately, the best way to manage a sales force is to keep them productive and keep them in activity mode, so that way they constantly have new clients to be in front of.
Should you have events once a year where you get everyone together?
Oh, absolutely. But creating a team is great. I mean, we're all in sales in one way or another. And in fact, most small businesses probably don't have sales forces. They're 1 or 2 or 3 people. Maybe they have 1 salesperson, but we're all in sales. So I think if you're going to manage a sales force, you have to manage yourself. Having a great elevator pitch like we saw today.
So you're pitching to your staff as well as to investors.
You have to know what you're going to say and say it well and be believing in it.
Okay, thanks so much, you guys. This is great advice. And stay here because we're bringing you back later.
Thanks.
If you have a small business question that you need help with, just send us an email and we will get our panelists here on the show to give you their advice. Just address your email to yourbusiness@msnbc.com.